Welcome to the debate. Welcome to the AMSM channel. This content is prepared under the supervision of Arvin. Usually when human beings dive deep into the ocean, the biological limits of that environment are entirely obvious to us.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
The physical pressure builds, your lungs compress, the oxygen runs out. You know exactly when you've gone too deep because your body it physically screams at you to surface.
Right. It's an acute, undeniable physical barrier. The water pressure is this tangible force that you can literally feel against every nerve ending. It forces you to respect the limits of your own biology.
Exactly. But what happens when the ocean isn't made of water, but of data? Because today we are completely submerged in this unprecedented, endless flow of digital information, and the pressure is entirely invisible.
Completely invisible, yeah.
Right. So the core question we're exploring today, and this is drawn from the Manifesto of the Digital Unconscious, is this. Is this relentless, hyper-connected data stream a sophisticated tool for expanding our human awareness and pushing the boundaries of our processing power? Or is it a traumatic stimulus that's trapping the individual psyche in a cycle of invisible terror?
Well, I look at the data, and I see the absolute definition of a traumatic stimulus. From a clinical perspective, we are witnessing a systemic cognitive breakdown. The internet has fundamentally ceased to be a simple communication tool.
You think it's gone beyond that?
Way beyond. It now functions as this manipulative, newly materialized collective unconscious. And frankly, our biological hardware just wasn't built to endure it.
See, I completely disagree with the idea of a breakdown. I see a profound, albeit really challenging, progressive adaptation. The human brain is actually learning to manage incredibly complex data ecosystems.
But the sheer volume of that noise.
Well, we're navigating environments guided by algorithms that at the end of the day are simply advanced statistical tools helping us filter that noise.
I don't know, it's completely unprecedented in evolutionary history. You can't just call it noise.
It is unprecedented, sure, but let's put some numbers to it so we can understand the actual scale of what we're achieving here. Back in, say, 1990, the average human being made about 3,000 conscious and unconscious decisions a day.
Right.
You chose what to eat, what route to drive, maybe what channel to watch on TV. Today, in the modern attention economy, we are processing roughly 35,000 daily micro-decisions.
Which is a staggering, almost incomprehensible leap. We're talking about handling an environment with essentially 340 times more information than we did just 3 decades ago.
Right. And that leap is exactly my point. To me, that is a profound testament to the expansion of human awareness and neuroplasticity. We aren't collapsing under the weight of those 35,000 decisions. We are adapting.
I just don't see it as adapting.
But we are actively utilizing these highly efficient, blind statistical systems, algorithms, to organize the chaos of this information. Even the weird cultural phenomena we see popping up online, like the current obsession with those empty, uncanny liminal spaces, they point to a brain that is actively working to seek out and organize patterns.
Okay, but you see 35,000 decisions as this triumph of neuroplasticity. I see it as a complete overriding of our basic biology. The mammalian brain is fundamentally not designed for the environment you just described.
How so?
The sheer volume of data you're talking about completely surpasses the biological capacity of human working memory.
Working memory has always been a bottleneck, right? Whether you're reading a really dense encyclopedia in 1950 or scrolling a feed today, it's the same constraints.
But the mechanism of input is entirely different now. Working memory is like your brain's short-term RAM. It can only hold a few discrete items at a time before it has to either, encode them into long-term memory or just discard them entirely.
Sure.
When you are forcing the brain to make a micro decision every 3 seconds, do I swipe? Do I engage? Is this notification important? Is this ad relevant? You are flooding the RAM. We aren't expanding our awareness. We're living in a clinical state of cognitive overload.
And you think that's why people feel so burnt out?
Exactly. That manifests as chronic mental fog, systemic psychological exhaustion, and a literal inability to focus.
Look, I think you are looking at the friction of adaptation and hastily labeling it a breakdown. Consider physical training, right? If you were suddenly placed in a higher gravity environment, your muscles would initially tear.
Well, obviously.
Right. You'd experience severe fatigue, your heart rate would spike, and to a clinician it might actually look like your body is in crisis. But through biological adaptation, your muscle fibers grow denser, your cardiovascular system becomes more efficient.
But the brain isn't a bicep. I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that muscle building analogy.
Why not? Neuroplasticity dictates that our prefrontal cortex is actively learning to filter out unprecedented levels of noise. Yes, it's exhausting right now, but we are navigating a highly complex digital ecosystem, and a brain is essentially building new cognitive pathways to handle that load of 35,000 decisions. It's a strenuous workout. It's not a terminal disease.
Let me stop you right there, because that analogy fundamentally ignores how the brain actually recovers. Muscles only grow because of the recovery period after the stress. You're completely ignoring the biological reality of directed attention fatigue, or DAF.
Well, DEF has been studied for decades, right? Long before smartphones were even a thing.
True, but the modern application of it is entirely novel. Let's break down how directed attention actually works. It requires intense metabolic energy to force yourself to focus on a screen and block out distractions. In the natural world, the brain utilizes something called the default mode network to recover that spent metabolic energy.
Right, that's the network that activates when we're like daydreaming or not focused on a specific task.
Exactly. Think of the default mode network as your brain's screensaver. It only kicks in when you have what psychologists call attention gaps, those natural empty spaces in our day.
Like waiting in line at the grocery store?
Yes, or staring out a window on a bus. Just sitting quietly without a task. It's during those exact moments of boredom that your brain cleans house, processes emotions, and, restores its energy. The modern digital world has entirely eliminated those attention gaps.
I wouldn't say entirely eliminated. I mean, people still put their phones down sometimes.
But the threshold for reaching for the device is virtually zero now. If you feel even a second of understimulation, you just wiggle the mouse, so to speak, and the screensaver never activates.
Huh.
Because there is no rest period, the prefrontal cortex, which handles our planning, our emotional regulation, impulse control, is constantly depleted. This is an exercise. This is a state of chronic low-level fight or flight. We're seeing a constant drip of cortisol flooding the nervous system, leading to systemic neurological inflammation. You simply cannot out-train chronic inflammation.
Okay, I hear what you're saying about the elimination of attention gaps. The cortisol response to constant connectivity is a very real biological challenge, I'll give you that. However, I want to pivot to the systems governing this environment, because I think you're misattributing malice to something entirely neutral.
Neutral?
Yes, the algorithms themselves are blind statistical systems. They completely lack any form of awareness, intent, or psychological motive.
Well, they don't need a motive to be destructive.
But they aren't like architects of human terror, as the manifesto suggests. An algorithm is merely mathematically quantifying our behaviors. It maps vector spaces. It measures exactly how many milliseconds your thumb pauses on an image before you keep scrolling.
Right.
It optimizes for engagement metrics. Because these systems are just code. They do not possess a mind. Therefore, they cannot be these myth makers you described earlier. They are just mirrors reflecting statistical probabilities based on our own actions.
That is a very clean, very engineering-focused way of looking at it. But let's look at what that mirror is actually reflecting. Have you considered the implications of Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious when applied to machine learning?
You mean Jung's idea that we all share this deep psychological basement full of universal human archetypes?
Precisely. Jung argued that beneath our personal memories lies a deep reservoir of these universal archetypes: the shadow, the great mother, the hero, the trickster.
Okay,
Historically, these archetypes manifested through ancient myths, religions, and collective dreams. Now, you are absolutely right that algorithms lack independent thought. They are just code. But by relentlessly ingesting billions of unconscious micro-interactions, those milliseconds of hesitation you mentioned, the impulsive late-night searches, the emotionally charged clicks.
Yeah?
These algorithms have formed what cyberpsychology calls a virtual collective consciousness, or VCC.
Wait, so you're saying the algorithm acts as a digital container for Jungian archetypes?
I'm saying it's the most efficient excavator of them in human history. The algorithm doesn't need to know what a shadow archetype is to extract it. It perfectly identifies the statistical shape of our collective generational trauma, our deepest insecurities, and our existential dread.
And why would it do that?
Because fear and outrage drive the highest engagement metrics. It feeds our own shadows back to us as viral trends and visual symbols. It has inadvertently become a modern myth maker precisely because it is mathematically optimizing for our deepest psychological vulnerabilities.
I have to say, I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning. You're taking a mathematical sorting mechanism and totally anthropomorphizing its output.
I'm really not, though.
You are. Just because an algorithm highlights a human behavior doesn't mean it's tapping into an ancient mystical reservoir of trauma. Let's look at a very concrete example that the manifesto brings up to try and prove this point: the internet's widespread fascination with liminal spaces.
Ah, a perfect example of the digital unconscious at work.
But is it? For anyone unfamiliar, liminal spaces are those viral pictures of empty environments. Abandoned shopping malls from the early 2000s, windowless transition hallways, empty waiting rooms bathed in harsh fluorescent light.
Right.
You are suggesting that this is the algorithm feeding our collective trauma back to us. I argue that the mechanics behind this are much simpler and, frankly, much less sinister.
Okay, how so?
These images are popular precisely because of what Gestalt psychology calls a failure of presence.
Meaning the brain is looking for a subject that isn't there.
Exactly. The human brain is hardwired by evolution to make meaning out of environments. When we look at a waiting room or a school hallway, our brain instantly expects people, social context, and narrative.
Sure.
When the space is entirely empty and stripped of that human context, the brain's pattern recognition software essentially glitches. It can't resolve the image, which creates a feeling of the uncanny. It's just an optical and emotional illusion. Internet users find this aesthetic simply entertaining. It's a fascinating visual puzzle for the brain to chew on. It is not a manifestation of global trauma.
See, I look at the exact same phenomenon, and I come at it from a completely different clinical angle. Let's return to attention restoration theory. We established a few minutes ago that the modern brain is suffering from severe directed attention fatigue. The RAM is full, the prefrontal cortex is exhausted.
Right, because of the lack of attention gaps.
Correct. When the psyche is that overwhelmingly fatigued, it desperately hunts for a state of soft fascination.
Let's define that for a moment. Soft fascination versus hard fascination.
Okay, hard fascination is what we do all day online. It requires active cognitive effort to process information like dodging traffic or reading a dense email. Soft fascination is an environment that holds our attention effortlessly while demanding absolutely zero active information processing.
Like what?
Historically, natural landscapes provided this, watching leaves blow in the wind or staring at a campfire. It's engaging but asks nothing of you.
Okay, so how does that connect to a creepy fluorescent lit hallway?
Because for a mind that is trapped in a digital architecture, it can't find a campfire. It latches onto these empty liminal spaces instead. But here is the profound paradox of the digital unconscious. Because these digital spaces lack any human context, the exhausted mind uses them as a blank canvas. It projects its repressed traumas, its feelings of total alienation, and its deep fear of isolation directly onto the empty digital hallway.
So you're saying we are seeking peace but finding our own projected anxieties instead?
Exactly. It's a paradoxical defense mechanism. The exhausted mind is seeking the eerie, uncanny comfort of absolute nothingness because the burden of decoding a constant stream of meaning online has become physically painful. It is not an entertaining cognitive glitch. It's the psyche's desperate attempt to find an empty room in an environment that is constantly screaming at us with data.
Okay, that is a very compelling way to frame it. But even if we assume the mind is using these spaces as a blank canvas for exhaustion, look at the behavioral result.
What do you mean?
The fact that millions of people can simultaneously view an image of an empty 1990s bowling alley and collectively share that precise, nuanced feeling of melancholic isolation actually shows the connecting power of the internet.
You think a shared sense of alienation is a net positive?
I think the creation of a shared emotional vocabulary is a positive. Gestalt psychology tells us that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. By interacting with these liminal spaces online, users are collectively closing the loop. They're discussing their emotional states in the comments. They're building massive communities around shared aesthetics. That is human connection, facilitated by the algorithm, not destroyed by it.
But what kind of community are we actually building when the entire shared vocabulary is based on psychological exhaustion? We're bonding over our mutual cognitive collapse.
I wouldn't call it a collapse.
And the depth of this crisis isn't just limited to our waking hours on a screen. The ultimate proof that this is a traumatic stimulus and not just an aesthetic trend or a cognitive workout is that the internet has now fundamentally infiltrated the literal architecture of our dreams.
Ah, you're referring to social media-related nightmares.
Yes, SMS. Have you looked closely at the globally shared clinical phenomenon of these nightmares?
I've read the clinical scales on it, yes. But let me push back before you dive in. Haven't human dreams always incorporated our daily environments?
Well, sure.
I mean, when trains were invented, people started having nightmares about being run over on the tracks. When television became common, dreams started taking on cinematic cuts. Isn't dreaming about an infinite scroll just the brain doing what it always does, just processing the mundane tools of the day?
It would be if the content of the dreams were neutral. But this is where the biological breakdown becomes undeniable. People across the globe, separated by entirely different cultures and languages, are reporting identical nightmare structures where modern digital anxieties perfectly merge with those ancient Jungian archetypal fears we talked about.
Okay, give me an example of how those two things merge.
Take the ancient primal fear of being chased by a predator in the dark. That evolutionary fear is now manifesting in sleep as the sheer terror of a viral mob. The dreamer experiences the sensation of being digitally hunted.
Wow.
Or take the primal fear of being physically trapped or buried alive. That is now manifesting as the physical sensation of an endless, infinite scroll where the dreamer literally cannot wake up, cannot close the window, and cannot put the device down.
So the technology becomes the physics of the nightmare.
Exactly. The algorithm hasn't just shaped our waking attention. It has breached the biological barrier of sleep. The virtual collective consciousness is taking our artificially processed fears, optimized by engagement metrics, and injecting them deep into our REM cycles. The phone is designing the anxiety, and the brain is playing it back in our most vulnerable state.
I will admit the phenomenon of social media-related nightmares is incredibly sobering. It does highlight a profound biological cost to our connectivity.
It's the ultimate proof that the data ocean is crushing us.
It certainly challenges the notion that this is merely a benign tool. The idea that the digital unconscious is a two-way street where the internet not only swallows our behavioral data but then actively structures and injects collective processed fears back into our sleep cycles is heavy.
If our neuroplasticity is adapting by fundamentally altering the architecture of human dreaming, we are dealing with a mechanism that is far more deeply intertwined with our primal psychology than just swiping on a screen.
Right. It proves that we are not just passively observing the internet. The internet is observing us. It maps our unconscious, and then it restructures our internal psychological world based on algorithms that inherently favor anxiety and existential dread.
While I acknowledge the gravity of that evidence and the reality of the exhaustion people are feeling, I still maintain my core position. The internet remains an unparalleled, incredibly complex tool that is pushing the boundaries of human processing. We are navigating a massive evolutionary transition period.
Transitioning into what, though?
Well, we literally went from 3,000 to 35,000 decisions a day in the blink of an evolutionary eye. Yes, the psyche might be buckling under this relentless load right now. We are experiencing the nightmares and the fatigue,
But human beings have a remarkable, historically proven capacity to develop new cognitive frameworks to survive new environments.
I don't doubt our capacity to adapt. My concern is the mechanism. True adaptation won't happen through passive biological submission to an algorithm. But, if we look at the psyche-myth architecture framework laid out in the material, we actually find a critical point of convergence for both of our arguments.
You mean the need for conscious integration?
Exactly. What Jung called individuation, the absolute necessity of actively pulling these unconscious forces into the light.
I completely agree with that point. The psyche-myth architecture framework makes it very clear that we cannot simply float aimlessly in this digital ocean. We have to actively and consciously understand these environments.
We have to.
When we look at a liminal space, we have to intellectually and emotionally unpack why it makes us feel isolated. We have to identify the digital archetypes that are being presented to us.
Right. Because if we recognize that an algorithm is feeding us a manifestation of our own shadow archetype, if we see the viral outrage for what it actually is, we strip it of its invisible power over our nervous system.
Exactly. We have to reclaim our human agency by actively making the unconscious conscious. We have to recognize the pressure of the water, precisely.
Because if we don't undergo that active conscious process of individuation, if we refuse to analyze why our working memory is failing, or why we are so drawn to the eerie comfort of empty digital rooms and infinite scrolls, we risk passively slipping into a state of mass psychosis. The biological defense mechanisms will eventually fail under the sheer weight of the cognitive load.
We started this discussion by picturing a diver descending into the ocean, feeling the crushing weight of the water against their chest. We are currently swimming in an ocean of invisible data, and the pressure on our cognitive architecture is immense.
Immense.
Whether you believe we are actively developing the lungs to breathe in this new environment, as I do, or whether you believe we are drowning in an algorithmic collective unconscious, as my colleague suggests, one thing is absolutely certain. We must become acutely aware of the pressure. We must consciously choose when to dive, and more importantly, when to return to the surface to breathe our own air.
Well said.
We will leave it to you to reflect on your own digital realities and the spaces your mind seeks out when the noise becomes too much. To dissect all the hidden layers that we didn't have time to mention here, don't miss our main, long-form deep dive podcast.